Okay, well, welcome to the City Deal Board, and thank you to South Cambridgeshire for hosting us. We've got a reasonably full agenda, and we obviously want to also hear from the Assembly into the various issues that are in front of us. So, first of all, if I could start, and I don't know if we've got anything special planned. There's no fire drill or something like that. And apologies for absence. Any apologies? I can't see any. Okay. Nil. Declarations of interest. If any members of the board got any declarations of interest on the items in front of us? No. Minutes of the last meeting, pages 1 to 8 in the papers in front of you. Any points of accuracy? No? So can we have agreement that those are adopted? Yep. Thank you. Public questions, of which I think we've got 3. And we've got Councillor Herbert and Jim Chisholm and Paul Hollinghurst. Okay, so we've got 3 speakers first. Councillor Herbert.
Thank you. I think there's been a handout that Ray circulated. 2 pages. I'm speaking as County Councillor for Melbourne, Foxton, Shepparth and Melford, a large chunk of the Cambridge to Royston corridor and part of an intensely interconnected cluster of employment centres and residential areas. I also chair the A10 corridor cycling campaign, whose members live between Royston and Cambridge and work at places like Melbourne Science Park, Johnson Matthey and Cambridge colleges and universities. As decision makers, you are presented today with an overwhelming message from the business community about the importance of creating a safe, joined-up cycle path network along the A10 between Royston and Cambridge. There are 2 letters before you. The first letter is signed by more than 100 employers. It outlines the high value placed on a prospective A10 cycle network as a means of travelling to work. Cycling distances are modest and achievable, car park spaces are running out, and congestion renders peak time car journeys unreliable. One high-tech company says that its recruit profile is someone who is young and fit, will work long hours, and expects to be able to cycle safely to work as a way of getting good daily exercise. One building trader says that its apprentices are now cycling to work in dangerous conditions because it is their only affordable means of transport. The second letter has been sent to you by all 11 partners of the Cambridge Biomedical Campus, including AstraZeneca, MedImmune, GlaxoSmithKline, the Medical Research Council, and the Cambridgeshire and Peterborough Foundation Trust. It says that an A10 corridor cycle network should be completed at the earliest opportunity, and I quote, "There is an urgent need to address travel congestion on the A10, which will be under significant pressure in coming years and will affect access not just to the biomedical campus, but Cambridge more broadly, and have an impact on economic growth, including the ability to attract employees to the jobs that we are creating. There have already been areas of development toward this, but there is a need to join up a network of safe routes to encourage cycling and walking, for example, addressing the A10 junction with the A505. It will be important to have these in place at the earliest opportunity to encourage new employees to the campus to adopt sustainable modes of transport from the outset, rather than seeking to support behaviour change once already established. In 2013, a Cambridge resident population of 125,000 had 190,000 vehicles driving in and out of the city every single day. Today, gridlock on the A10 approach is increasingly frequent. More of the biomedical campus and new housing developments south of the city have yet to be built. There are no plans to dual the A10 from Royston because that would simply increase traffic into Cambridge. But an A10 cycle route has been identified as a potential city deal scheme because, as the letter from the biomedical campus partners explains, it will ease traffic congestion for those for whom public transport or private vehicles are necessary. The city deal is built around the principle of unlocking further funding and making sure that schemes are delivered in full, not unfinished bits and pieces. It is very welcome news that the Cycling Ambition Grant will address the route between Cambridge and Foxton, but the southern half of the corridor is unfunded. This is a highly deliverable scheme with land ownership issues sorted, path design completed, and local consultation on details already carried out. As the local member, I must ask if the City Deal Board is confident that it is taking into account the views of the business community when making decisions about City Deal funding. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. I mean, we've got the letters that have been circulated, and I know you also spoke to this, and on some of the detail that you've raised, we're not at an advantage because we don't have a copy of what you just said. But I'd just ask if Graham, you could just respond in terms of where we're at in terms of the planning of the A10 corridor.
Thank you, Chairman. As Councillor Van der Ven said, we've secured significant additional funding for the A10, and this was in progress when the board made its decision on the 28th of January. So we've secured £2 million for the A10, which will complete a significant part of the route. What is essentially left, because members of the board will recall the original proposal was £7 million of city deal funding, which was not allocated in the first tranche. What remains left to be done when that £2 million of Cycle City Ambition grant funding which we've secured has been spent is likely to be a section from the southern end of Melbourne down to the A505, crossing the A505 and then St Vincent surrounding villages. So they are the bits that are not currently going to be dealt with. As with all of these schemes, they can be dealt with in a piecemeal fashion. You don't have to do the whole thing in one go. Those schemes in total are probably about £4 million, of which a significant amount is the bridge. Another significant amount is the links to surrounding villages, and probably about £500,000. Councillor Van der Ven referred to the completion of the route. If one looks at just the A10, completion of the route down the A10 would be about £500,000 to get to the final and then, as I say, the other bits are additional. So it's really a matter for all members to decide how you wish to take that forward. They could be delivered as part of this programme, or they could be delivered if funding is secured as part of the programme.
Well, certainly as the £2 million that have arisen evidences, there is funding from other sources as well. So we obviously want to follow through opportunities to win external funding that can assist this link as well. Don't know if any other board members want to say anything, but obviously. Yes, Steve.
Thank you, Liz. Hi, Susan. I'd just like to just echo one of the things that Lewis said earlier, and this is all very new, this board and assembly and everything like that. With public question time, we should have like a real question 10 AM the day before, and I've only just been able to read this now, so if you get in the future, I mean, obviously I'm happy to answer it, but just for the general public, the way we handle the future, I'd like to get advance notice, and that's in the detail. When you talk about cycle paths or anything not being done piecemeal, I think that cycle paths do lend themselves to that. It's not ideal, it's not the best way in the world, but it is a fact of life that we can, tailor the length according to project. And where you talk about where it's going out, the further out we go, there's a declining benefit to it because obviously the cycle journey is further. So I'm all in favour of these cycle paths being finished, right? But what worries me is if we start adding things in that haven't been through the process of our well thought through agenda of how to allocate the first bit of funding, then really we're cherry picking things that haven't had the same scrutiny, the same prioritisation as other schemes. And so, just like Lewis, I know there are other sets of funding out there because we've just got £6 million. And prior to getting that £6 million, there was a definite request from people to put the cycling schemes right high up on the agenda because of how quickly achievable they were. And one of the answers we gave was, yes, they are speedily available, but we might be able to get money for them as we go along. Whereas to get a big chunk of money for one of the bigger schemes along the way, it's much more difficult. So I'm confident we will get this done. I don't want to add it into the city deal process, into the city deal budget at this point in time. But the other part of your question is whether you felt that we were listening to businesses enough. It's always difficult because you have 100 signatures here on one paper and 10 on the other. And I'm sure if we went to some of the other schemes, on some of the other corridors, we would get 100 signatures from the businesses along them, the people on them, because there is a network of things that we need to deal with. We can't deal with everything at once. But we do have John from the left here today. The Assembly has 3 representatives from the business, and as proposals go through, there's a full consultation process. So I think, yes, we are listening to business. In fact, we're listening to residents, businesses, universities, councillors, everything as much as possible. But we have £20 million a year, and it's nowhere near enough to do everything. So obviously people will be disappointed.
Councillor Mann.
Yeah, thank you. I tend to agree. I can see a lot of the arguments, but I think if we had put the cycleways into the city deal at the very beginning, we might not have got the money coming through from the government because there would have been, well, that's already been prioritised or whatever. So I think that there are big funds available, both from government and other sources, to encourage cycling, and it's something that we all should be doing, so I don't have any problem with that. I don't think we'd be right to add it back in, and anyway, we can't really do that at the meeting now. We would have to go back and do it at the next meeting. And I think we've agreed, or at least there's been a suggestion, that cycling schemes would come forward if we were slipping on other schemes and things like that. So my suggestion is that between ourselves we agree that yes, it's a priority and we're interested in everything else, but we don't write it down just in case we get the funding in the meantime from another source. But if there is a slippage, then in the other transport schemes, then we've got that one in our back pocket ready to go. I can understand the frustration about doing it all, but Steve's also right. It's very easy to add on to a cycle path, whereas it's a lot more difficult to stop a road. I think so. My feeling is yes, we've got every sympathy. Yes, we should be looking at it. Yes, we've got it in the back of our minds, but I don't think we should put it down as a priority at the moment.
We've had a statement of commitment, both particularly from Councillor Count and also the principle that within the funding that we've got, we will continue to monitor how we've allocated the money. And clearly, there is a case, having given priority to radial schemes and the need to tackle that part of congestion to see if there is spare resource, then that can also be redistributed. Councillor, John Bridge.
Yeah. I just feel it's appropriate to address the business comments in terms of the fact that clearly we talk very extensively with businesses, and one of the challenges we have is competing priorities along all the corridors, because all of them regretfully coming into Cambridge are a challenge. We are just doing some quite extensive consultation with businesses in terms of what their priorities are, and certainly what we've seen, the cycleway that you relate to doesn't regretfully come very high up their priorities in terms of looking at what they feel will bring the most economic benefit. We agree that we have to look at all modes of transport, but unfortunately there are clearly in the business minds different priorities regretfully to those that are presented here. Not that we don't want to develop it, but it's a matter of what we should do first. And I was at the Travel Choice Awards this morning speaking, and Travel for Cambridgeshire is very involved and getting involved in not just that, but a number of different initiatives to try and help ease along those different corridors. And I think that's something we also need to be proactive and work with everybody on to see not just one mechanism, but the many mechanisms that can be used to actually alleviate the kind of problems we've got.
Lewis, just broadly speaking, I agree with what you said, but just really to amplify 2 points. The first is, it's clear to all of us that there is economic benefit in doing the cycle way, but the advice we've received is that there is more economic benefit in spending that same amount of money in other areas. But the other point is that it seems to be easier to raise the relatively small sums of money required in initiatives than the large sums that we've got elsewhere. The city deal money needs to be spent in a way that where the additionality is the additionality of this in some way generate additional. Sorry.
Okay. So you've heard from all of us. I've also written back to the Cambridge University Health Partners and offered to meet them. So as part of that, I'm sure there'll be a discussion about this as well. So it's unfinished business at this stage. Okay, Councillor.
Thank you.
Okay. Our next public speaker questioner is Jim Chisholm.
Good afternoon. I should say that in '98 I wrote something suggesting that the best way of providing increased capacity for cars was actually to improve cycleways. The famous economist John Maynard Keynes, formerly of this parish, said, "When my information changes, I alter my conclusions." What do you do, sir? In the report of the Executive Board meeting the 28th of January, it is stated that more cycleways would not make a significant difference to the number of private cars going in and out of the city. Given that city trips across the boundary from South Cambridgeshire to the cycle trips across the boundary from South Cambridgeshire to the city have increased by 89% in the last 9 years, whereas the number of car trips are relatively stable. 2, that Travel for Cambridgeshire surveys show that the average length of cycle commutes is nearly 6 kilometres. And 3, that the 2011 census states that 10% of all commuting trips in South Cambridgeshire are by bicycle, and that 2,400 are over 5 kilometres, with 650 more than 10 kilometres. And 4, that over half the benefits of new cycle schemes under the Cycle Ambition Grant are for improved health, and that clearly has big economic benefits. And 5, 36% of the households in the lowest quintile income group in East Anglia have no access to a car or van. And 6, on March the 2nd, the ODPM Nick Clegg press release cites research showing that if we had levels of cycling similar to Denmark, it could save the NHS £17 billion within 20 years, reduce road deaths by 30%, and increase the mobility of the nation's poorest families by 25%. How can we ensure that the board is better aware of this and other evidence?
Thank you, Mr. Chisholm. Do you want to add anything on what's proposed? Because clearly we're investing in the radial routes or proposing to look at schemes for that.
Yeah, I think, Chairman, all I would say is that the sorts of figures that Jim's talking about, we're aware of, and we get all of this data as well. And so, as we as officers bring reports to you, and there clearly will be further prioritisation exercises and so on, clearly we will need to justify any recommendations we make to you, and that will be including this sort of data. So we're aware of all this. We certainly bring it to bear into any of the reports we bring to you. If you wanted a more structured way of receiving information, we can do that, but I think we can probably incorporate it within the recommendations we bring to you in terms of what is best given the city their objectives. That's how I would suggest we deal with it.
So when we come forward in the summer stroke in the autumn with schemes, then we can address and incorporate the responses. Okay, so I think whilst we've just had a discussion about one particular part of the area, we overall are committed to a major investment in cycling, and that will be evidenced as the schemes come forward later in the year. And obviously some of them will be subject to discussion about how well they link up and how well they might go further forward. I think the other part of it is some of this is in the hands of employers and the destinations that attract a lot of the congestion, because some of the discussion that we envisage is actually going to be about discussing with employers and other organisations what provision they make to actually make cycling more attractive. Okay.
Okay.
Thanks. And third is Mr. Hollinghurst. So we've got a copy of your question, but you're welcome to read it.
Shall I read it out? So, right. The prioritised schemes in the city deal include a number of bus priority and infrastructure measures. As a city resident, I commute to Cambourne, so I see at first hand how Stagecoach struggles to operate a reliable service. The bus priority schemes all promise to ensure that a bus journey is direct and unaffected by congestion caused by the general traffic on the corridor, which is a strong statement. And the economic prioritisation study, which looked at the benefits to housing and jobs, assumed at face value that the infrastructure will deliver journeys which are unaffected by congestion. So it's vital that the schemes deliver this, otherwise the economics will be wrong and passengers will continue to suffer delays. At the moment, the scope of the schemes is unknown, certainly to the public. And I think this is a substantial risk. I'm just going to say Liverpool has just carried out a year of traffic studies on its 26 bus lanes, finding that 22 of them were of little or no use, as it was making traffic flow at junctions cancel out any benefits. So I'm not saying that bus lanes in Cambridge won't work, but just that great care needs to be taken with the schemes. Just as Zurich has successfully freed up its city centre by regulating the rate at which cars flow into the centre, which has allowed buses to share roads with other traffic without delay, which has created a virtuous circle of improved transport measures. I was going to say park and rides feature strongly in the city deal schemes, but these tend to increase traffic in the region of the park and ride and undermine conventional bus network. A better approach may be to provide parking and cycle access to existing bus and rail routes. All stops should be sort of inviting with shelter, cycle parking, lighting and information. And also there's the rail network. This is undergoing significant enhancements, provides journeys which are unaffected by road congestion, but receives little mention in the economic prioritisation study. Enhancing access to the rail network and multi-mode ticketing should be a strong city deal objective, not necessarily in tranche one, but looking forward. So just a few points to raise. How can we should be sure that the bus schemes are going to work? Can they guarantee congestion-free journeys? What of Liverpool's experience? What of Zurich's experience? Are park and rides most appropriate? Or is encouraging multi-mode journeys onto the conventional bus network better? So Cambridge needs a free-flowing bus service as part of an attractive multi-mode transport network, and the city deal should be looking openly at how to achieve this.
Well, thank you all for a thoughtful contribution. We haven't got the substance of it on our agenda today, but I'll just ask Graham, do you want to comment on any aspects?
Thank you, Chairman. I suppose the first thing to say is that it is very helpful to look at other places and try and learn from them, so we don't always try to reinvent the wheel. Having said that, Cambridge is fairly unique, I think,
yes.
And so we can't actually apply any one of those other places directly to Cambridge. So not that I'm familiar with Zurich, but I understand from other people, I know it's a big city, but I also understand from other people it has very different characteristics in terms of the way that people travel and sort of, their kind of their behaviour. So you couldn't necessarily apply that model to Cambridge. Liverpool similarly is a very different place. So we need to try and learn from other places, but equally look at the solution that's appropriate to Cambridge as a historic, very tightly constrained city. So coming back to your, I think your particular points, and that the city deal certainly aims to create free-flowing public transport as much as possible. Can we guarantee end-to-end uncongested, absolutely free-flowing bus journeys? I mean, I think I'd have to say no, we can't guarantee that, because most of the journeys, if they end up in the city centre, are going to be on shared space, whereas what the city did is looking at particularly are the radial routes to get into the city centre. I think, though, as the Chairman's alluded to in relation to some of the other questions, there is another part of the city deal which is looking at broader city centre, in fact Cambridge-wide, congestion issues. And so I think we need to try and pull these different bits of the programme together and find ways of dealing with the bus lanes in some instances, because we think they are the right solution where they're appropriate, but also dealing with the broader congestion conditions in other areas and in fact across the whole of the city. So I think the points you make are, I mean, they're all very, very valid. I think we need to apply them to the specific Cambridge situation. And I think, certainly my view is that from the measures we're talking about, we can get very, very significant improvements in the movement into Cambridge from the surrounding areas. I think maybe if I can just share the final point on Park and Ride, which has long been an important part of the strategy, and in the city deal it continues to be an important part of the strategy. I think there is certainly a question over time about whether the Park and Rides should move a little bit further out of the city, and therefore move away from some of the most congested spots. We've already done that with the Park and Ride in Milton. If you look at some of the other Park and Ride sites, I mean, particularly Madingley Road, Trumpeton Road, they are sort of within the city area. At the time they were designed, there wasn't really development around them, so they were kind of very much on the edge of the city, but Trumpeton, for example, is now surrounded by houses, and the development from the university is taking place around the Madingley Road site. So I think as part of the deal, city deal, we do have proposals to either relocate or expand or change the Park and Rides, and I think we will look to do that over time. I think for this area, though, and the final comment I'll make, and again it's where Cambridge is different to Liverpool or to Zurich or other big cities, what we have here is Cambridge City, but with a fairly, in fact, very dispersed and rural hinterland. And so the sort of the traditional routes or solution where you think you could have a bus route down the main corridor that would then actually pick people up along the way to deliver them into the city is much, much more difficult in Cambridgeshire, and particularly in Greater Cambridge, because the villages of South Cambs are very, very spread apart. It's actually quite difficult to access and make commercial those sorts of bus routes, which is why the Park and Ride system works very well for us. So you allow, where appropriate, people to drive to a site where you can collect enough people to then provide a viable bus service. So we think that works well for our situation. It may not be the case in other areas, but it certainly, I think, serves a fairly dispersed rural area very well, which is essentially what we're doing.
Yes.
So there'll be consultation on each of the different projects, but also a general consultation about, well, how do we as a city region address the change in behaviour that would need to occur to achieve congestion. And you reference in your response, obviously there's issues about discussing the contribution of rail, but within the scope that this body has, we're effectively focusing on the opportunities. Our sort of core is that we have a fund of money and the opportunities for the councils to reshape the way that people travel by road, by cycle, by bus. That's not to say that we're not going to continue to advocate for rail investment, but it's just not. It's not directly our job to deliver it.
I think delivering this sort of high quality interchange between these different modes of transport is perhaps something that the city deal could help with, especially regarding the rail network, because I realise the core infrastructure is beyond the scope of this, but linking into the existing network. And I think actually in the case of Cambourne, there is the scheme description does mention more than just a central park and ride, that facilities will be distributed. And if you look, for instance, at Hardwick at the moment, there's very, very poor facilities for bus passengers. In fact, in the evening, there's just black, dark, unlit bus shelters with litter all round the back and very, very, nowhere to put bicycles. It's very uninviting. So I think maybe some of those sorts of issues could be picked up by the city deal.
Well, we can facilitate, we can invest the capital. We certainly would expect there to be a far better bus service for you to Cambourne as a result, because
yes.
in resolving the reliability issues on the way in and getting people in, we will also be able to have a two-way bus service to Cambourne that,
yes.
that you could then depend a bit more on than you can at the moment. Yeah.
That's right. And currently Cambourne's not linked to St Neots at all, which is a big omission.
Right. Okay. Well, so our focus, Mr. Hollinghurst, is going to be on the capital, but we obviously will be in dialogue with the transport providers as well. So thank you for your contribution, Bob. When we come forward later in the year with more substance, you'll be able to see whether it matches some of the challenges and tests put forward. I don't think we'll be going down the Liverpool route.
Yes. Right.
Okay. Thanks for your time.
Thank you very much.
Okay, well, thank you for the questions and inputs. We also get input from the Assembly, and so if I could ask Councillor Bick to cover the items that were raised. What we will adopt, I hope, as a pattern for each of the City Deal board meetings is that those issues that the Assembly have which don't specifically relate to particular items we'll cover in this item, and then give Councillor Bick the opportunity to be specific about the agenda items as well. So, Councillor Bick, item 5.
Yes, thanks, Chair. The Assembly held its second meeting, a lengthy meeting on the 6th of March. It's continuing to engage its impressively diverse membership of stakeholders and trying to meld their thoughtful input into constructive advice for the board. As you suggested, Chair, I'd like to speak to that advice when you come up to the individual items. So that means matching up the sections on my report that are at agenda item 5 to your agenda items 6 and beyond. And just I wanted to make a particular general request, which doesn't relate to any one of these items, that I'm sure that that members of the board will understand that to sustain the level of engagement that the Assembly, I think, has been fortunate to achieve so far, I and members of the Assembly would greatly appreciate that our input is specifically addressed in the course of your conversations on the various items, and that we do end up with a reasoned response. That will certainly assist, I think, the dialogue between the two bodies and improve the level of mutual understanding of the factors we're all trying to grapple with here. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Bick. So we're happy to then move on to item 6. So item 6, which is the proposal to establish a Greater Cambridge City Deal housing development vehicle. A couple of volunteers, one or two volunteers to introduce.
I'll introduce, and then I think it's probably worthwhile noting this is a report that's been written by Alan Carter, who's Head of Strategic Housing at the City Council, and Stephen Hills, who's the Director of Housing here at South Cambridge District Council. We've also consulted with the County Council and the University as well in terms of putting some of the principles together for this paper. I think it's worth noting that the reason it's on your agenda today, Chairman, is the City Deal itself contains a commitment to develop 1,000 new affordable homes predominantly on rural exception sites, and that's over and above the two councils' housing numbers in the local plan. So these are additional housing numbers that we need to facilitate development of. But that doesn't represent the whole aspirations of the two councils, or even the three councils' aspirations for house building. We both district councils have ambitious plans for housing revenue account developments, and we have been flagging to both our councils, certainly here, that we need some development capacity within our housing teams to help take sites forward. we set out at paragraph 19 of the report the sorts of things that we need the joint development vehicle to do. And they represent areas where we don't currently have all of that capacity to bring sites forward from conception all the way through to delivery on the ground. And that's a capacity we to the extent we don't have it, we have to buy in. That's in very, very short supply in the marketplace, and potentially the partners will be competing against each other for those resources as we move forward. As I say, it's not a new. This isn't a new area of work that we've asked the councils to look at. Certainly, the council here has already included proposals in its medium-term financial strategy to put resources into this area. And what we're proposing here is a rationalisation of those resources and an expansion of that resource, so that we can both share that resource across the three councils, and I include the county council in that proposal, and to expand it to include some of the areas where we don't currently have the technical skill sets to deliver. So we think the housing numbers that we're looking at in terms of direct delivery are certainly over 4,000, and potentially in some business models we might look at might start to get up to 8,000 units over the business plans of our three councils. So we're talking about a considerable number of housing developments that we want to bring forward. But if we do put a team together, and the model we're proposing to work to is that each unit that this development team bring forward will have a fee charged upon it, a fairly modest fee of between 3 and 3.5%, which is currently being used within Cambridge already for other developments. Even though that model will be self-sustaining in the medium term, in the short term there will not be enough income to cover the cost of that unit while we get it up and running and get it set up. So the proposal that we're putting to you today, and we'll be putting to the three councils hopefully in July, will be to pump prime this team, so in other words to cover its running costs in the first 3 to 4 years of its operation, by which time we get to year 5, the operation will hopefully be self-financing and self-generative. And hopefully we'll be able to generate a surplus that we can then reinvest in housing development down the line. That in a nutshell is the essence. I think it's worthwhile pointing out that the vehicle will not own any property assets of its own. It will merely facilitate development and bring developments forward from conception all the way through to delivery on the ground. I'll stop at that point, Chairman, and then as a detailed questions Alan can help deal with, and I'm sure others will want to input.
Okay, thanks Mr Collier. So it's basically a proposal for a three-way partnership of the three councils in the city deal to facilitate significant increase in the number of homes being built. Councillor Bick, did you want to give feedback on the sense?
Chair, members of the Assembly weren't initially clear how this would work and what it would do in relation to the three council organisations. But we did go on to have a very helpful question and answer session with officers and a discussion on it. And for that reason, I set out in the first paragraph of my report the takeaway we had and where we understood it. In short, we didn't see this as an investment in any particular housing scheme, but a service organisation which would enable schemes that would come along in the future, and the benefits of pooling of expertise, sharing the use of the same team, greater scale enabling us to retain expertise better and to access the service more cost effectively and avoid duplication. So this was a principle that members of the Assembly wanted to support, but they did want to see greater definition of the business model before supporting the final budget approval that's requested here. And I think there is a desire to see quantified what cost avoidance this actually provides to each of the three councils, and to understand the plan in practice by which we could expect this to be self-funding by 2017-18. We were advised in coming to that conclusion that further definition was work that would anyway need to be carried out, and carrying it out and supporting this in principle only at the moment would not hold anything up. And so our recommendation to use a derivative of the original one is to approve the funding of this in principle and make that subject to further details being made available on the business case and the specification of people involved in this to establish the joint vehicle, and that could be brought back in June for a final decision by yourselves and the Assembly, making a recommendation at that time, but positively.
Okay, no, that's helpful and useful challenge and input. I think in the process of preparing the report that would go to the 3 councils in July, there would be the opportunity to share that with the Assembly, and then, but basically what I propose, Councillor Bick, is that we just route it along with the input from the 3 councils, so that it comes back as a detailed proposal.
No, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. Yeah.
I've finished.
Hello, Tim. I haven't seen you for a long while. Yes, I agree. The one big concern that I have is that whilst I'm wholeheartedly in favour of what we're doing with the city deal and the Assembly and all these sorts of things, I am concerned that my councillors back here at South Cambs frequently don't know what's going on. That is a big advantage most of the time, but on the other hand, you do have to pretend to help. So, seriously, what I'm suggesting is that it says in your report that the 3 partner councils, well, I think we're going to take it to our scrutiny committee to look at, and I suspect that you will do the same with Cambridge and things like that. So I'm hoping that rather than the Assembly doing the scrutiny of these sorts of things, I'd like to see the 3-member councils put in their views and issues, so that we actually are carrying all the councils with us. So I want to make sure that the views of each individual council are heard. That's all.
So it may be that it goes to the councils and then comes back into the loop. Mr. Carter looks like he wants to answer a question. Are there any questions? No, he doesn't look like. Sorry, Councillor Camp.
Thank you, Chair. Obviously, Cambridgeshire Council welcome this opportunity to join in this HDV development scheme. I think it can only be beneficial to get some capacity into something that we all know we're going to be doing an awful lot of, and that we have to do to deliver the city deal. And we all have various skills or assets. We have some land assets, and we'll be hoping that together we can find a way that it works for all of us. I do wonder. I'm totally in favour of the recommendation as it stands, but I am concerned about a level of micromanagement that might creep in if every time we approve some sort of budget thing, we then have some sort of process where we have to double check everything that officers done to the minute details. Now, it is early days, so I appreciate the concern the Assembly has raised, but I don't tend to myself go into that level of detail once it's been handed over. It sounds from what I've heard from the other 2 councils this morning, it was running on to Lewis's suggestion, that you are putting it through your scrutiny, and you should be aware that we no longer have a scrutiny facility. We have a committee system, which I must say, you know, are perfectly capable of looking at a deal like this. If it's, I cannot allocate work to a committee system, it's the nature of that. I would certainly suggest to the appropriate committee that they look at this piece of work the same way as you do. And so therefore we all get the, shall we say, the confidence that this is correct. But in moving forward, I think we have to be very careful about how often we call on those resources to look at the level of detail. But it is early days, so I'm quite happy to do that today.
Any other input from board members? Just speaking for the City Council, I mean, it's the same with South Cambridgeshire. We have our own track to follow. We've got opportunities to build more affordable homes. We're clearly working through the local plan, but we do see this as being a big opportunity to lever in inputs. Some of that will be land, it might be county council land, it might be other owners' land. We've had the discussion with the university, and Professor Sanders and I are offering a further discussion with the colleges who have got land holdings. So, subject to those sites being suitable for development and planning, we will continue to look at seeing if there's both further land and further opportunities to get investment in viable propositions. I think this is as it says. It's not going to be the owner and manager, but it is the route to bring the expertise together. So we'll put it. There'll be some further work led by Mr. Carter and Mr. Collier. We will put it to the three councils. It is good to get their involvement, particularly those involved in housing, and we'll bring back the detailed scheme. So on that basis, and with your input, thank you, Councillor Bick. If I could just move to the recommendation, which is then carries into the budget as well, and that is that the board approves a total of £400,000, being £200,000 for 2 years to assist this three-way partnership. Is that agreed?
Yep.
So that's agreed. Moving ahead, I just want to take item 9 before item 7, and the reason is that, assisted by the input from the Assembly, we've clarified a budget proposal, and therefore it makes sense to take that before what is currently item 7, because that involves expenditure. So if we could just go to item 9, and we could first have the introduction to the report. Mr. Hughes.
Thank you, Chairman. Skills is, when we started the City Deal process, skills in the local area is one of the key issues that businesses tell us are holding them back or risking holding them back, alongside, as the previous item has indicated, housing and particularly the availability of transport infrastructure or infrastructure more generally. So this paper brings to the board proposals to address one of the key elements of the City Deal package, which is to increase the level and appropriateness of the local skill base. Just to introduce briefly how the skills system works, and we're talking here particularly at the sort of post-16s. We're not talking about necessarily the youngsters who come out of school and then move on to university. We're talking about the 16-year-olds who are making decisions as to what they do with their training and employment opportunities at that point in time. And at the moment, we describe in the paper that the skills system as being nationally, but how that's applied locally is a fairly devolved model. So funding comes from government to the providers of the skills, so organisations like Cambridge Regional College, but there are many others as well. And essentially they receive their money based upon the number of people that they train. Now, whilst we have, through our local enterprise partnership, a skills strategy, the government has a skills strategy, it's still quite a numbers game. And so what is actually being produced by the providers, who are all independent businesses that need to remain commercially viable, what is being provided is not necessarily what the local businesses in this area need. And the main reason for that is that actually it's the youngsters, when they're making their decisions, they're deciding what they want to do, and that doesn't necessarily match up with what businesses need. And so it's often said that we have too many hairdressers and nail therapists and so on. That's a bit of an exaggeration, but there are many courses that are being undertaken in colleges and other providers that don't necessarily, or aren't necessarily, the top priorities for our local businesses to enable growth. So that's the issue that we have in the skills system. There are a number of things going on at the moment that are seeking to address that issue, and they are relatively successful, but not resourced and not as comprehensive as is desirable. So within this area we have what is called the Cambridge Area Partnership, which is a partnership of most of the local schools, secondary schools and colleges, and they seek to bring into contact with the youngsters some businesses in the area to help them make their choices. In other parts of the Cambridgeshire and indeed beyond, the local enterprise partnership actually runs what is called a skills service, and that is essentially the focus of this paper. So the skilled service model, which as I say is currently operating in the northern part of the local enterprise partnership geography, so within Fenland, part of Cambridgeshire, but also to King's Lynn and Peterborough, is essentially what I describe as a brokering service. It's an activity that brings together youngsters in the schools and colleges, businesses in the local area, and the training providers such as, for example, Cambridge College. And so it consists of a number of people. Some of those people are working with businesses to identify what their needs now and in the future are, working with the colleges to try and encourage those colleges to put on the courses that the businesses say they need, but also working with the youngsters within schools. And this is not just at the sort of 15, 16 year age when they are finally making decisions, but also earlier on in their school career, to try and encourage youngsters to want to do things that the local industries and businesses want. So in the Greater Cambridgeshire area, there's a big demand for things like IT technicians, lab technicians and so on to drive the high-tech growth. There are not enough youngsters demanding courses of the training providers in those disciplines, and so we are not getting enough of those youngsters coming out of training to feed the local businesses, and that is what business consistently tell us, that they're not getting the right skills from the providers. So the proposal in this paper, as I say, is to create a skilled service. It has been discussed through the Assembly. I'll leave Councillor Bick to talk about the discussions that took place in the Assembly. But the proposal is a skilled service that brings together businesses, academic the providers and the youngsters to make sure that they are given the right information to make the right choices on the basis of what local industry needs. It's a well-tried and tested model up and down the country. It's certainly operating in a number of the other city deal areas, Ipswich probably being the closest, but many of the other city deals around the country use the skilled service model, and our local enterprise partnership does as well. The total cost of the model is about £250,000 a year for the whole activity. However, as the paper demonstrates, there are a series of other potential funding streams that could reduce that. I won't go through what they are, they're in the paper, but would reduce that to a net £125,000 per year to run the activity. And we would expect over a period of time, it doesn't happen instantly, but we would expect over a period of time to see real results from the skilled service, whereby more youngsters are going into the areas of training that local businesses want, more of those are coming out from that training and therefore feeding what the businesses need, and enabling the local economy to continue to grow. So that's essentially the proposal before you, Chairman, and happy following Councillor Bick to make the answer the questions as you need.
Okay, well, thank you, Mr. Hughes. As the recommendation states, talking about the what here, we're talking about the principle. There's still some work to be done on the how. Councillor Bick, you've got, as we recognised in looking at the membership of the Assembly, you've got some expertise on this area on your group.
Yes, Chair. A little bit in common with the reaction to the housing proposal earlier. Whilst we have some members who are very, very familiar with this subject, that's not all members, and we had to do some burrowing around and questioning in order to understand this. And I think the best way that we came to that understanding was that we really have a triangle here between the formation of the aspirations of learners in school, what they want to do. Secondly, the provision of vocational training for them in training institutions. And thirdly, the actual or forecast skill needs within the local economy. And these three in the triangle need to be aligned as effectively as we can get them aligned if we are going to avoid needless skill shortages in the local economy. So this is something that both speaks to our aspiration to grow the economy and to address bottlenecks in doing that, and also to the ability of young people in school to actually realise a realistic aspiration in hitching themselves to the parts of the local economy that are going to be successful. One of the things that became very clear to us in discussing this was that there are a large number of players in this field already. And this is a very important aspect of this subject, and I think it suggests the way we all treat it is to remain aware of the proliferation of different players. Many of whom are doing really excellent work already in parts of that triangle. And so what we are talking about here is really laying over that an ambition for all of that work, which is greater than the sum of the parts. And the project, the skills team project, is talked about as though, well, it must be relating to what we already do as an organisation. And of course that is partly true, but is rarely completely true. So this project does add something to what is going on already. We did feel, though, that the way the skills team project should be implemented is that it should be done in a way which is especially careful not to dislodge existing activities, existing levels of ownership for policing of it, but it actually harnesses the valuable work that is already going on. And for that reason, we felt that there should be some further discussion about this between some of the leading players in this field to try and flesh out this proposal in a way that it can work and be seen to work with the grain of what's going on, but add that bit more that we think is worth going for. So that's the rationale for the recommendation that we brought to approve this in principle. And in fact, members of the Assembly most recurrently during our discussion were surprised that such a worthwhile objective as this could actually be achieved by such a small sum of money, as was mentioned in the paper. I don't think anyone present put a price on what they thought it could be done for, but just to let you know the flavour of sentiment within the Assembly. But to approve it in principle at the moment, whilst a smaller group from the Assembly work with officers to actually flesh this up in a bit more detail so that it can be seen to work with the grain and effectively with what we have already, and to try and bring that back to the June meetings of the Assembly and the Board.
Thank you, Councillor Bick. Before I invite others to contribute, I'd probably just say that the idea of an informal group is welcome, but that it would be useful if it had perhaps, and again, not wanting to enlarge it, a representative from the LEP and from the board, so that it sort of it has those linkages. I mean, this is clearly a key area, and as both you and Mr. Hughes have said, there is an expectation both from the education institutions, but particularly from employers, that as well as the objective within the city deal, that we will play a part in assisting this. Contributions that others want to make? Mr. Bridge, and then...
I think one very much supports the principle that we need to try and connect together the schools and the further education businesses to make sure that we can provide the skills for the future. And certainly we do have best practice that Grant Hughes and Councillor Bick have already referred to, both through the Cambridgeshire Area Partnership and the Local Enterprise Partnership. To my mind, I think the wording of the recommendation A should be slightly changed because there is no point of having a group of people to look at it if we're already agreeing the principle of the model. What we need to do is remove the word model so that we approve the principle of skill service, so that actually the group can actually look at how that skill service should actually be made up. And secondly, I fully support that under B, it's very important that both the Local Enterprise Partnership and Cambridge Area Partnership, who are two key people already delivering in this area, are an integral part of that group, so that actually what we can do is come back with the model that those people feel is the right way to proceed.
Any other contributions?
Yeah, not those 2 points which I'm just going to think about. Well, I very much welcome the Assembly's offer to set up a working group and look at this, because I, for one, I feel that I've lost contact with this area of skills, and I know that you've got some great skills on your Assembly that can really dig into this. One of the things that concerns me is back in the early 1980s, I used to chair industrial liaison meetings with the college because of the gap between what the employers wanted and what the colleges were doing. I know I look too young, but we're talking over 30 years ago, the conversation was very similar to the conversation we're having today. And somehow, with all our great minds combined over a period of time, the world has changed in many different directions. But there still feels that somehow or another we've got this split between what the desire is and what's happening. And some of that, I think, isn't due to problems with the education system or the government or that. It's just the nature that business changes rapidly in response to what they get, and therefore the education system lags behind, or the education system is in an area where the actual area changes. So it's not always necessarily true. But it does lead me on to one area of work that I'm very keen as part of this model. I want to know that once we put all the money in and these people are up and running and delivering it, that somewhere along the line we get some very measurable, yes, we've done what we set out to do. And I don't mean by anecdotal, we changed one course. I was, back in the 80s, I was affecting one course at a time. This is a much bigger deal. We need to start a new way of thinking. And I want to see some sort of deliverability that can measure that we're affecting a much larger area of the population. And I'd really like that built into the size of the work that's going on. Taking on board John's points of view, I personally think that the captain, the should really be part of this working group. I think there can only be benefits to this. I support them in that. And that particular recommendation, I'm on the fence because I'm not sure if the model actually meant delivering the structure of the thing. We're actually saying the skill service model is what we're going to go down. So I'm, leaving it up to others, and I'll go with the flow on what we mean.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you for those two contributions. So, essentially, we're deciding the what, the principle of it, and if we, I'm happy to drop the word model. I think we talk about skill service. I think it's not going to change the detail of the report. In terms of the recommendation B, I think the suggestion is that we include the LEP, perhaps a board representative and someone nominated by the Cambridgeshire Partnership. I think one of the issues that we will come back to is the how, and it could well be that at that stage, who's to say how this would be delivered? It could well be on the basis of a contract or an agreement, and we would have to justify an open process at that stage. So it could be at that stage that CAP might take on a different role, but it doesn't stop the value of their input at this stage. In terms of your point, Councillor Bick, in terms of the quantum, I think we start here, and then we see how it goes. I think a budget of £250,000 per year is a good base. And we're clearly looking to get input from others before we go to a decision. Councillor Manning.
Yeah, just something that occurs to me. If we identify, or the skill service model, whatever, identifies that there's a course needed and that course isn't being run, is it possible for us to pay an education provider to do it?
Well, I'm not sure we're going to, as this board, be directly commissioning, but the skill service could be looking at that.
I only believe if there's a need and you've got the people, then the providers will want to develop it anyway.
Yeah.
What I was just saying to Councillor Manning was it could be to underwrite it.
Yeah.
So if the youngsters weren't taking the course up, or the funding wasn't quite enough to, that's potential.
I don't think we rule it out. I think the resource is there to open up
open doors and be used as to what effect it can achieve. So, and as we, without prejudging some of the discussions, as we're conscious that there's a whole new range of opportunities for people coming out of schools and colleges, and there's a whole new challenging opportunities and range of skills that are going to be needed to be developed, then we can't preempt the fact that there may be options to fund courses. So we have...
Perfectly happy with that. Thank you.
Okay, so with that, minor amendments to A and B, happy with those? The board happy with that? Okay, so thank you, Councillor Bick. Yeah, that gives a good opportunity to set that together, and then you can link up with Mr. Herbert and others to get that structure put together. Okay. All right. So that was our other budgetary item, which brings us back to item 7, which, along with the housing item, the skills item, is a set of budget proposals. Mr. Mallion looks interested in.
I don't know how to respond to that, Joe, but I'll dive straight in.
Well, you were on telly last week, so this is the downer, is it?
Far from it. Far from it.
Okay, all right.
Thank you, Chairman. The budget report is set out in front of you and focuses on the 2015-16 financial year. We will go through a process on an annual basis where we set out the budget for the coming year. That doesn't stop any changes happening throughout the year. The recommendations suggest that we do review the position halfway through this current financial year, and that we are at a fairly embryonic stage in terms of the evolution of the city deal, so therefore there will be some changes, and we will seek to try and refine the budget as we go, but there will always be the setting of the budget prior to the start of the financial year. The report in front of you has set out some costs associated with some activity, which I'll come on to in a moment, for both 15-16 and the implications for 16-17. At this stage, we've only looked at the first two financial years of operations of the city deal, primarily because some of the funding is unclear in terms of the source of the funding through the next spending review, and therefore we don't want to overcommit without understanding what our resource flow will be in the forthcoming 2 financial years. Once we've got the spending review out of the way this year, we'll have a clear understanding and we'll know what likely resources we've got going forward. As you see from the report, there is some capacity to consider other investments in the coming months, but we're focusing on the key essentials to get the ball rolling. Chairman, the previous paper, which you obviously in relation to skills, we weren't presumptuous in including the detail of those proposals in the budget report because we knew you were considering it separately, and therefore I will have to suggest to a member of the board that we actually have approved an amendment to the recommendation to take on board the previous decision you've just taken. The main thrust of the content of the budget proposals are set out in paragraph 6, and Chairman, I suggest that perhaps we go through each block of those proposals on an item by item basis. So, if you're happy, Chairman, should we go to central leadership and coordinating functions?
So item, effectively, the first item, so we're talking about 2-year budget, but effectively in outline, but today we're proposing agreement to this year's commitments, yeah? So item 1, central coordination, which we regard as essential to progress what's a £100 million programme plus other items, yeah?
That's correct, Chairman, and the nature of the general nature of the tasks that we see are being undertaken by the 2 roles are set out in the appendix. We will, subject to the agreement this afternoon, convert those the content of those appendices into a job description and then start the recruitment process if we get agreement this afternoon. I'm happy to take it each block by block. Chairman, so if there are any questions around the
that would probably be useful. So any questions on the sorry, I haven't given Councillor Bick the opportunity, so I think perhaps if Councillor Bick has a say, then we come back to taking each of these items one by one. Councillor Bick.
Thanks, Chair. I have a series of comments from the Assembly on the different items, elements of the budget that's proposed. First of all, on the central leadership and coordinating functions, the Assembly wanted to make the observation that the position of Programme Director is an exceptionally key role to all of us involved in the city deal, and we are calling for very great care over the development of a person spec to set against alongside the role description that was provided in the officer's papers. On affirmation from the officers, we were satisfied that the two roles that were proposed for central leadership and coordination would be available to support the Assembly as well as the Board, recognising that the Assembly does have within its remit to pursue its own lines of inquiry from time to time in support of the overall objectives of the city deal. Those were the observations about the central leadership and coordinating functions. Secondly, on the strategic communications, we recognise this need, and we would also like acknowledgement from the Board that this resource will need to be provided to the Assembly as well as the Board, because the Assembly is understandably the focus of public representations and public interest, and it's in the interests of the whole city deal enterprise that the relationship with the public is handled professionally. And I say that especially recognising the levels of exposure some non-political members of the Assembly are opening themselves to by their valuable participation in the Assembly. I'll jump over the skills item because I think we've already covered it. Just refer to inward investment. We supported this element of the recommendation too. The city deal we saw is focused on economic growth, and if only because of churn, an element of this will be the attraction and arrival of new enterprises to the area. It's a necessary aspect of clustering, which a lot of the local economy is based on, and the city deal is predicated on removing barriers to economic growth. So this is a process that may be more vigorous before this churn and an attraction of new businesses. But we did believe it was important that there is an area-wide locus of expertise and knowledge to explain Greater Cambridge, to help and support incomers. The options for potential investors are not only national ones, but also global. And we felt that if we're to maintain the quality of employment that we have recently attracted to the area, this kind of provision was really necessary. Elsewhere, we were advised such resources as are proposed here are often fully publicly funded. And the attraction of this proposal was that the public sector is being asked, only amongst several other contributors, to only pump prime funding, and clearly that is possible because of the buoyancy of our local economy, and it's to be looked forward to that it would be proceeding after 2 years on a self-funding basis. So those were the comments we had on the budget.
Okay, thank you. We go back to the items one by one. Firstly, the central coordinating functions and the definition of those two roles of project lead officer, senior lead officer and project manager.
Let's take any questions on those.
All right, so basically this is a 2-year proposal initially. Any questions on that? Okay. So yeah, I mean we regard these as essential, and as has been mentioned by Councillor Bick, we'll share job descriptions when they're developed. Okay, so I think we'll just take votes on these one by one if people are happy.
Quick question: are you confident that if you're advertising a senior posts like this for 2 years, that you'll get suitable applicants? Very long concept.
Yeah, I mean, obviously time will be a test of that. Confident, probably hopeful, I would say, because of the attractiveness of the role. Because I mean, it is an exciting job, it is an exciting programme, and I think it's a real opportunity for somebody to come and shine. So I think the role will be very attractive. And there are quite a few people out there who will want to spend 2 years supporting what is an innovative programme and making their name. So I think it is a real opportunity. But whether the 2 year will put people off, I think time will tell.
Can we just? I mean, I think for today's, I think we're just. I think partly we're prescribed because we took a view that we would just agree a first 2 year budget. But I think as part of the development of the job description, we could maybe bring that issue back, and we may decide to take a bigger commitment.
Sure, I don't think, sort of picking up on your comment, I don't think we were going to advertise it as a 2 year post.
Okay.
I mean, obviously the funding currently stands for 2 years.
Okay.
Chairman, a pool of candidates might be larger if we remain open-minded about the possibility of this post being filled by a secondment from the public or the private sector.
Yeah, no, secondment's certainly another option. So, subject to that rider about the issue of sort of how it's advertised, I mean, we have this funding that we've established, and that we would, subject to the uncertainties of life, and we would make sure that we have sufficient funds for this function in particular through the 5 year period. So item 1 effectively here is to approve this £150,000 per year. Everybody in favour? Okay. So item 2 is the strategic communications. The only additional point I'd make, Councillor Bick, is that I think certainly from my perspective, I don't know if Mr. Mann wants to add anything, that the communications is about the delivery of projects, so it's not like the board is suddenly going to undertake sort of other initiatives other than on behalf of the whole city deal. Mr. Mann?
Well, Chairman, there will always be some project-specific communications around those projects, which will be part of that integral part of the project.
And that will be separate, because that will be as part of when they're subject to the development and consultation on detailed projects, there will be identifiable communications budgets within a discussion about some of the projects that we've adopted.
Yes, that's absolutely correct. And this resource is to support the overarching communications around the whole system program.
Okay. Councillor Camp.
Yeah, I'll give you a few comments and assembly. I think there needs to be an element of support, not only that we, for one thing, that there could be overlap, but we need coordinated messages to go out. So if you have a strategic communications, there can be a very clear, this is coming from this person, this is coming from that person, I do worry, maybe not now, but because I get on so well with Lewis and Ray, but at some point in time in the future, when you have three councils like this with different political leaderships, we have an assembly with a difficult, different, that really was an accent. different political persuasion. That at some point in time in the future, communications may get a little bit tangled up. Whereas if we have strategic communications, then I think that will help smooth that up. And really, my apologies, that just came out of nowhere. Sorry.
Okay, so £60,000 per year for 2 years proposed for strategic communications. Okay, that's great. Thank you. Economic assessments. Anything to add?
Well,
the reasoning.
I think Mr. Leon was actually want to.
The person that we nicknamed Trigger. Sorry. It's nothing to do with thoughts and horses. No. Sorry, Mr. Lynn. Did you want to add anything about economic assessments?
No. We've capacity to half in the Treasury, and we've made clear that the limits on what we want to spend, what we want to spend on this purpose. It's necessary. It might be helpful to us. It might actually build a better database evidence base around other interventions in the Cambridgeshire area. We need to do it as part of the deal with government, and so we've told them that the expenditure is. We've taken Luke to saying 50,000 over 5 years on the basis of 10,000 per year.
All right. So again, we expect this to be a commitment.
No, well, if it assists us to just merit and evidence that we get the further funding. Okay, can we agree that? Thank you. Fourth, smart city in the sum of £20,000 a year, on which we had a recent workshop because we've obviously got some big themes. Do you want to add something?
Yeah, we kind of put this in to try and leverage in other funding, particularly government funding, maybe European funding. So again, it's a small bit of seed funding to try and galvanise the fantastic resource that resides around the Cambridgeshire area in the research industry and business sector and in academia. There are world-leading people doing things here. They're not doing them for Cambridge at the moment, they're doing them for other cities around the world. So let's kind of try and put it all together to make Cambridge the smartest city we can be, particularly in terms of solving our congestion and transport challenges. So already government announced, Chancellor announced in the budget last week that there would be 40 million, I think, available for smart cities. 40 million. 40 million. Big four. So there are other cities who talk good talk, have a vision around what their smart city and ambition is. We need to kind of get working on that quickly, I think. So I've been liaising with colleagues at the county elsewhere, and we'll be working on bringing in, as I say, business and academic contributions as well. We hope to bring a report back to the August meeting of this board. But in the meantime, if you're supportive, we will start working and getting bids ready already. Because once the Chancellor's announced, Council servants will start looking around as to which cities they want to give the money to. So we can keep working on that as soon as possible.
Well, I think we've got unique skills in this city that need to be built. We've got some stunning companies that we could be in partnership with. So this links in with the Connecting Cambridgeshire agenda, which is the county has led really well. Inputs from the university on that. So the fabric of both the multi-fast broadband, the general level of Wi-Fi broadband, mobile connection. It's about information technology for smart choices of travel. It's about smart technology that we might add as part of the any interventions on the road space. We've got opportunities to link up with engineering. So I think again that this is a good start, and we may build on this. Any Councillor Campbell?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, just like the skills one that was earlier referred to, the £125,000, is that sufficient or not? The £20,000 here, it may be sufficient, but the one thing that worries me about this one is the fact that we'll have to develop bids to get the sort of monies and that, and the moment you start developing bids, the money goes up. And it's not about this, it's not about the skills funding, it's more about our general approach. I think we have to rely on the fact that we will be agile as we move through this year, but flexible, and not ever, if something good comes and is put in front of us at a later point in time, point to the budget at the start of the year and regard it as an overspend. If we make a decision later on in the year because it's a good use of money, that is not changing the budget to cover an overspend, that is saying, no, this is something we want to pursue. And I think I just wanted to get that out there right at the start.
Well, I think we're in a position here to make clear allocations. We may need to be, as you say, Councillor Camp, agile, and if we've got the chance of a 40th share of 40 million, then we can merit and justify spending more. So either one of the councils could make the contribution and then come back here and request the support or whatever route we need. So a modest £20,000 proposal in our judgment then for 2 years, agreed? Okay, yeah, thank you. Then the item on inward investment, which as Councillor Bick mentioned, has been prompted by the Cambridge network with the concept of a Cambridge promotion agency. So any further points to add to that? So it's essentially it's 60,000 in year one and then 90,000 in year two. Yeah.
Councillor Bick was far more eloquent than I, so I won't duplicate the comments that he made. But I just point members of the board to paragraph 6.45, which sets out the conditions upon which the board can satisfy itself the funding for the growth. I think that's quite key in terms of making sure that the board gets what it thinks it's seeking from the investment.
Okay, now I was just going to move the form of words which I'll write down so that Mr. Watts isn't lost with them. That it's subject to 3 conditions. That it's subject to there being a detailed service level agreement,
that there is clarity both in the job description and the outputs from the investments that we're going to make, and that we also want to be, I think we just want to be persuaded that Cambridge Ahead and Cambridge Network are going to work jointly on delivering this. So, any comments?
Yeah, I'm back along that, say that when they deliver jointly, I want to see a keener working relationship between the two, because if somebody arrives looking at Cambridge and they go to the organisation that has no money, has no knowledge, and get one answer, and if they'd have gone and knocked on a different door, it's a pointless exercise for us. We need to know that we've got a united front door. I'm not suggesting that we actually need the organisations to go so far as to merge wholly or whatever, but I do think that the businesses need to encourage these organisations to have a very close structure so that we get the best that we can out of the Greater Cambridge area. I'd also like to make one further request, and that is the nature of this piece is to promote the Greater Cambridge area, the City Deal area, but there will be questions that come through your front door that may not be deliverable in this area, but may affect one of our neighbours, and I want that to have a high profile that we can do good for the community at large. Remember, I sit here with my Cambridgeshire hat on, and particularly with international customers, that sometimes you have to think of these other things. And I'll give a very specific example, is the Alconbury Let lies outside of this area, but there are huge advantages there that are not available within the City Deal area. So just to be aware of that as we let the body that's formed, the project that's formed, aware of what we require from that. It's more a plea than a SLA plea.
No, Professor Sanchez.
I agree with that. Just taking your three conditions, I wonder whether the word jointly should, if we could replace that by the word effectively. Not quite the same.
Okay.
Cambridge Ahead working effectively with Cambridge Network isn't quite the same. It's subtly different from jointly.
Okay.
It might just be a bit.
Well, I mean, my interest was ensuring that both were engaged in the Cambridge Promotion Agency, but I think I'm happy with that change if others are.
I think, in my mind, we really need to have one organisation that takes responsibility and accountability for it, and even if they have to work in partnership with another one. But it's very dangerous to kind of give it to two people and then nobody knows who's actually running it. So I really think that Cambridge Network should be prime mover in this and obviously give them the responsibility to ensure that they do work in partnership.
So that's a perfectly fair point. I don't think we were wanting to change from Para 661 that Cambridge Network, who are instigating this, would be supported in leading it. We're just keen to see if we can assist a bit of improvement in the partnership working. Councillor Manning?
Yeah, I do have some reservations about this. The first thing is that I think at the moment we're struggling with infrastructure in every way, and I'm wondering whether we're actually doing the right thing in trying to get more firms to move in the next sort of 1 to 2 years, which is what this budget is actually looking at. In some ways, I'd have preferred to leave it for a year and then say, well, this is what we're going to do. But my other concern is the fact that we've got the two people who are doing it. I know that the Cambridge Ahead are virtually specifically Cambridge, because having seen their manifesto, I don't think they know that South Cambs even exists, because half the companies that they list as being in the city are actually in South Cambs, but it starts off for a city of 124,000. So I think Cambridge Ahead is very, very Cambridge orientated. But this city deal is not, it's a partnership. And we need anybody who's promoting it to be promoting it together and promoting the fact that we're working together and not saying that this is all happening in Cambridge City. So I do have some reservations about this, but Professor Saunders saying what he did about them working together would help. But I must, on record, say that one thing in their manifesto that I am concerned about is that they say, for example, that we've completely underestimated the number of houses and we should be doing 60,000. So I have reservations about us putting money into organisations that are saying things that are not the policy of this board. So with those provisos, I suppose I shall vote for it, but not with a great deal of enthusiasm.
Well, I think we've got Claire Ruskin from Cambridgeshire Network is in the audience, but we haven't got the opportunity to discuss all of the different angles. So I think the issue is that certainly as a city, we're not trying to make Cambridge preeminent. We always talk in the thread of Greater Cambridge because that is the nature of the entity, and similarly we're part of an economic region that can benefit as much as as we can in terms of the incoming investment. My understanding in terms of the strap line is that not surprisingly, if someone's in India or China or America, they don't just if we said Greater Cambridge, they say, hey, I don't know where that is. So perhaps it's just partly that, but that's why we seem to keep coming back to the fact that Cambridge is not the magnet, and as you say, it does need to be taken account of the fact that this isn't about maximising investment. This is about selective and planned look at where we're going in terms of that investment.
Okay.
Yeah,
I'll happily say.
But so,
having said all of that, I agree with you absolutely that Cambridge is the brand.
Yeah.
There's no point in saying anything else if you're trying to talk to people internationally. Cambridge is the brand.
That's the reason. I mean, but certainly when we're talking to government, along with talking about Cambridgeshire, we do talk about Greater Cambridge. So are we together again, thrust about? Sort of. Okay. Right. Well. Well, we've got a proposal here for 150,000, and I think what we're also going to propose is that, unlike some of the other items, we're expecting that this will be a 2-year investment in the expectation that the initiative will develop its ability to fund itself. So we will definitely be reviewing our position if we're asked to continue funding after 2 years. So that's that. So if you can take the inward investment item of 150,000, okay? 170.
It's only an account. I'm reading the report. It's 170. Apologies. Yes.
You're all right. I'm glad that Cambridge has. You thought it was 150.
I would have a typo in the report.
Okay, there was a typo.
Yes.
Okay, right, 150,000. And then we've got an item which is
the 3 conditions.
And the 3 conditions. Are you people happy with the 3 conditions that I read out? So effectively, that there's a detailed service level agreement. There's clarity of the job description and the outputs from the investment, and that we're persuaded that. Cambridge Network are working effectively on the initiative. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. The 2 more on this item. Additional housing fund, which we've already discussed, joint vehicle. Are people happy because we've gone through the detail in that report to agree 2 times £200,000? Okay. And finally, we've got the skills sum, which we've set at a contribution of 125,000. Being half of the funding required for the proposal. I think we've basically at this stage we are seeking to agree that.
I believe we need a part of recommendation actually some word.
Yeah, well, it's to as part of this recommendation to agree the funding to put in the budget a provision for £125,000 for 2 years, subject to the detailed work that may reach other conclusions and other proposals. Okay?
Yes.
Thank you. So in total, we have committed a sizable amount of the funds, but we still have other funds, and so we expect to come back, as Mr. Mallion's mentioned, I think in the report, with a further review of the use of the funds that we've got, and it may well be that halfway through the year we may come back with further proposals.
Chairman. Just for members of the board's information, the table in paragraph 9 on page 30, the sum carried forward after having allowed for the skills provision reduces that balance carried forward to 3.3 million.
Right.
So still a significant level of resource available to the board for future investment.
Okay. So we've started off, but we'll obviously, yeah,
it was that 170.
That's what I said.
That's why
that drew my attention.
That's a typo.
I've just realised that the rest of that column, some of it does and some of it doesn't make any sense. For example, where you've got strategic cost 60, a total of 300. Now, I think what we've done is we've shortened a 5-year table.
That is correct, Jim. When I first did the table, and this is totally my error, nobody else's fault, I can't blame anybody else. Yeah. When we first did it, we had a 5-year projection. We've reduced it because of, as I said in my introduction, about the uncertainties of new homes bonus going forward. So I've kept the total column, not changed the numbers. So please ignore the total column.
Let's just pretend.
The actual numbers in the two columns of the 2 years we're looking at are correct.
Okay. So we'll just delete that column.
Yes.
Okay. Councillor
No, that was it.
Okay. So, I mean, essentially part of the purpose here was that we quite reasonably needed to make some initial budget proposals, and I think as part of the review at half year we can just perhaps look particularly, Mr. Malin, at those items that have got a 5-year implication and then make commitments. Okay, well thank you for all your work on that. And so we move on to item 8, our last item other than, sorry, I did turn the page. So on item 7, we've got subject to the agreement. So we've got item recommendations B, C and D. I've kind of referred to them on page 24. But so we've got approving the non-project costs are set out in section 6 of the report. The currently utilised funding is set out in section 8 be retained effectively for other objectives, which is the balance of the contributions from the 3 councils. And as I've said verbally, that we'll have a review at the mid-year point. Okay, so do we agree B, C and D?
I haven't really spotted this before, I just want some clarity, please. The sums involved are basically revenue sums, but in B, it says there's potential to invest them in infrastructure schemes. Is that the intention that it is convert it into infrastructure, or is that a sort of misword?
No, well, it's totally in the hands of the board. The revenue can be used for capital. You can't use capital for revenue. And therefore it's whatever comes forward to the board in terms of investment.
It's at our discretion, and I'm sure the Assembly will have a look. I think the word potential gives us as much wiggle room as we want. Okay.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Item 8. So, Mr. Hughes, if you could introduce the item on transport programme and city centre congestion.
Thank you, Chairman. This is a paper really of 2 halves. So the first half looks at the future City Build Transport Programme. So on the 28th of January, as I said earlier, this board agreed the first 5 years of schemes, which totals about £180 million. And there's then, hopefully, all things going well, further 2 lots of 5 years beyond that point to complete the whole city deal. So the first part of this programme suggests a methodology for prioritising schemes for the next 5-year tranche of activities. That's 2020 onwards. It may seem a bit early to be doing this, but we think it's important to get a continuous pipeline of schemes to make sure that there's no gap between the end of the first 5-year period and then when schemes come on stream in that second period. Particularly bearing in mind the second period could be £40 million a year, and therefore that's a lot of money to deliver schemes for. The proposal that we're putting before you is that we use the same methodology we did the first time around, which is the economic prioritisation tool that Cambridgeshire Econometrics produced for us. We would propose to put through all of the existing transport schemes in the overall City Deal programme that weren't prioritised in the first tranche, and any other schemes that it's decided should go into that process at time that sifting takes place. What we say in the paper is that we could do that work over the summer and into the early autumn and then bring back the prioritisation to the board. What we're suggesting though is that at that point we would pause and we wouldn't actually do any technical work on developing those schemes until probably mid-2017 onwards. The reason we're suggesting that is that there's a huge amount of officer and consultant time going into the preparation of the schemes for the first 5 years, and if we load preparation of a load of other schemes into that process, we'll overload the officers and also overload our consultant resource, and we'll probably end up with lower quality and higher prices in the course of doing it. We don't actually need to have these schemes developed that early. So the proposal is that we could do the prioritisation early and then actually do the technical work from mid-2017 onwards. In reality, there's no reason why we couldn't actually delay the prioritisation a bit as well if that's what we wanted. It's not urgent, but we could actually be getting on with that using the tool that we have. The second part of the paper talks about one of the elements of the first tranche of funding. So members of the board will recall that part of the £180 million package was about £23 million for what was termed Cambridge capacity studies and congestion issues. So this was a sort of undefined package of measures on top of the main schemes that we talked about, such as Milton Road, Histon Road, and so on. And the proposal in the paper is that we start an early period of consultation around just some key themes, and paragraph 17 of the paper sets down the themes around more restrictions on movement, demand management, capacity enhancement and behavioural measures. So the proposal in the paper is that, subject to the decision of the board today, officers do a bit of outline technical work to bring back through the June cycle of meetings, first of all through to the Assembly and then the board, the Assembly being the 6th of June, the board I believe the 17th of June, and subject to decisions then we could move on towards consultation over the summer period. I think just to say to the board at that point it would be a very, very high level consultation if we went ahead with it on the basis of these themes, so it wouldn't be scheme specific, and so it wouldn't be a consultation where we would be asking the public particularly what do you think to this particular scheme in your vicinity, but it would be, I think we would envisage some ideas around what could further restrictions on movement look like in Cambridge, and what sort of impacts could it have, what sort of schemes could there be under the heading of demand management, but as I say, not specifically. If the board wished to go with that, we think we could probably get out to a high level consultation over the summer period. Ideally that would need to start before the main summer break, so typically we'd want to start at early July and probably run right the way through the summer period, and then the paper suggests that we would, following the results of that, do some further technical work and then bring papers back to the board. But again, it's for you to decide how you wish to play that, but we certainly can do some sort of consultation if that's the will of the board.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Bick.
Chair, taking the first part of the report initially on the process of the transport programme itself, we were pleased that the non-prioritised schemes from tranche 1 would get early reconsideration for tranche 2, but believe we got an assurance from Mr Hughes in that discussion that that won't result in effectively tranche 2 being cast in stone too prematurely, because we are necessarily for tranche 1 looking, focusing strongly on projects that are available and are able to be actioned fast, so that we actually hit our slots during the first 5 years. But for tranches 2 and 3, we do have the advantage of a more reflective process and a more consultative process. So we hope that the reconsideration of the schemes that just missed tranche 1 will allow for the possibility, at least, of new thinking coming along in the meantime before mid-2017, and that we keep our minds open for reshuffling, any reshuffling that might appear appropriate. I think a lot of things can happen once we start consulting with the public whether it's about the city centre or anywhere else. And I think that there is some point in not sealing up tranche 2 totally before we need to. Secondly, we are making a request that the report that's scheduled for the autumn on tranche 2 should include information on known and forecast funding streams that are available to support the City Deal objectives in transport. Clearly, the whole of the City Deal was predicated on the use of the money we get from the government, along with money that we have from other sources, including developers and other budgets. We would like, and think it's valuable for public understanding of the whole of our programme. We'd like to have on the table what we believe those other resources are likely to be in the future. And thirdly, on this first section, we have added a further recommendation to those that are in the officer report. The officer's report recommendations we do support. This will be in addition. As has been referenced at the beginning of today's meeting, there were originally 3 rural cycling schemes that were recommended by officers for inclusion in the tranche 1 programme. The one in the south, the Suffolk Walden Herbert or Cambridge cycle and pedestrian routes, the Bourne Airfield Cambourne cycle and pedestrian routes, and the Cambridge to Royston cycle link. These weren't included. We understand that clear decision as far as the board is concerned, and the Assembly acknowledges that fact. But what we do want to propose to you that you recognise the balance of these schemes after funding from other sources. The scheme between Cambridge and Royston, part of this will be covered by funding from the Cycling City Ambition Fund, which we're very pleased about. There is obviously a balance that won't be funded to that scheme, and there is the other 2 schemes. These schemes in general, as was said at the beginning, are of relatively low value compared with some of the bigger schemes involving busways and roads. They, as a function of their impact on economic growth, they're quite cost effective, therefore, and not one of these schemes, in fact, is very, very close in terms of economic impact to one of the schemes inside the city that was supported in your tranche 1. The suggestion we want to make to you is that you recognise the balance of these 3 schemes after alternative funding sources have been exhausted as reserve schemes for tranche 1. And in fact, I think that really quite closely encapsulates what Councillor Manning was saying at the beginning of the discussion in the public question time, that these schemes are available and are more quickly actionable than some others. Some of the bigger schemes that have been adopted for tranche 1 have been identified as quite high risk in terms of the route through public consultation to implementation. Obviously, we're hoping that those risks are sailed through, but it did seem to us wise that there should be a reserve concept which the board can switch to, and it did seem that these schemes would be ideally suited to slot into that reserve concept. So we'd be grateful in your discussion whether you would address our recommendation on that point. On the second section of this report on city centre congestion, we did welcome this more open thematic structure to inform a public debate on this very thorny question of city centre congestion, where it's likely that we will need to consider some more radical ideas. Whether we adopt them, of course, is up to us. And so we welcome that, and we welcome the fact that the Assembly's contribution to this will be possible, because we do feel that the diversity of our stakeholder base can provide a very useful critical platform for the evaluation of alternatives. The point about going to the public, we did want to see that this wasn't done at an exclusive time, so that significant part of the population doesn't get a chance to contribute. Notoriously in the city, consultations that happen entirely during the months of the summer are criticised and challenged because large parts of the population are not present in the city over the summer. So I think if we start something or finish something in the summer, we need to make sure that it is also running in a period when the whole community is likely to be around. So we support the, with that comment, we support the recommendation about the city centre congestion.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Bick, for a detailed response. So we've basically got two issues plus the comments of the Assembly there. So we've got both the principle that we develop the tranche 2 scheme. Mr Hughes has recommended that there's some work done towards the autumn on those, but effectively, given the urgent priority to get cracking on the schemes that we have to deliver to have any chance, or to have the right chance of getting the second tranche of £200 million funding, and also because we're here to tackle the immediate issues, we give priority to from then until mid-2017 onward to the existing programme. So that's recommendation A. And recommendation B is that we undertake, that we develop proposals to address congestion. We undertake engagement and consultation starting in the summer, but taking account of Councillor Bick's point that there's a need for that to continue. Any issues, comments you want to make on the report and those recommendations? Councillor Carrick.
I've picked up a number of things that Councillor Bick has alluded to, so I hope these will be clear. You mentioned that you didn't want to seal up the prioritisation. I think that's absolutely vital. The way I read recommendation A is we set up the process to how to identify the next set of schemes, and the last thing I want to do is actually prioritise any of them. And the reason for that is any shuffling, as we put it, that goes on later on, will end up with somebody being shuffled out and a great big lobby group arriving because they were promised something, and I'm loath to let anybody be on a promised list if they may subsequently not be. So I totally agree with the method we prioritise. I certainly agree with the work going in the autumn to sort of put some numbers against them. But I want us to be fleet and agile as we move forward. But the important thing is, whether it's for the 5-year trigger or something that falls out in the first 5 years, is we have that pipeline. It's absolutely vital we have a pipeline. Okay. Now, cycling projects, as we've said earlier, are very easy to backfill in some cases, but we do actually in the first tranche have something. I tried to find the figure, but it's not in our papers. I think 176 million, something like that in the first 5 years. So we have in that 100 million allocation, we've already got 76 million of eligible schemes that are moving forward. So I'd be quite surprised if things move in that way. But if there's any external funding, I'd be shocked if a major project comes forward. But I'm not promising anybody anything on that. Just we need to decide as we go along. Whether it's middle of 2017, and it's later then, or it's January of 2016, at this point in time, I am not concerned because I think that moving. Whatever we come up with in June, I'm not sure of my order of comments here, so I may jump about a bit. Whatever we come up with in June will most by necessity be very high level. These are concepts that people are interested in or not, and we'll see what people talk about. There's no way we can do the level of work to work up schemes for them, and also we don't have the mandate to do that. It's such a complicated area that affects the public, the employees, etc., that what we need to do is put a lot of stuff on the table and say, what will you let us discuss and what won't you, and then see just how difficult that may or may not be. Personally, I have a lot of time for what I describe as soft measures, and I like that we talked about behavioural change in there. And I'd like to see, as much as we talk about whether it's bus lanes or whether it's ticketing machine. We had one speaker earlier on talking about the information at bus stops being correctly lit, and that racks for cycles, that kind of thing, which I regard as a soft measure space. And I think that if we can just trim a few percentage change off of the peak hour flows, these soft measures may prove to be quite good without having a massive amount of funding back on them. And he mentioned that the ticketing element against that. Now I know as part of devolution, some of the county council are asking devolution to actually have the right to enforce that, because at the moment we actually have to work with our partners and see what they're willing to do. But I'd love the devolution power to say to all those suppliers out there, actually you're only going to get to use one system, so everybody can use it, because I think that makes a difference. We have to bear in mind that we have the triggers set up for the first 5 years almost. I mean, and we still don't know exactly what's going to happen for the next ones. And therefore, if we set a prioritisation list on what we exactly expect this panel to come up with, and it's tweaked something slightly differently, we might have to do our modelling slightly different. So that is another reason for reticence for too early a prioritisation. With regards to the cycle schemes being automatically in there in the reserve list, I think I've explained why I'm not keen for an automatic thing, but they have a natural propensity of their ability to deliver to be an early consideration. And I'm not, because they are cheap, I don't want to think that automatically makes them cost effective, which were words that we use, because actually the productivity of the cycle schemes was lower than the cost priorities, which is why they moved down to, so maybe not as cost effective, but certainly lower down the actual overall effect. The last thing I want to finish on is the consultation processes in June, and I totally agree that there's a large proportion of the people that live in Community Cambridge, the student body is not here in the summer months. But I would also argue that they are one of the most accessible. If we set up our consultation correctly, there is very few students that is not email proficient, and therefore if we use the colleges to actually promote through their student bodies of their existing students that are coming back for 4 years and let them know this is going on. I know we don't get great returns from any element of the population, but at least we know that will have reached them. For the students that are coming next year, the new students, so to speak, they haven't enjoyed they haven't experienced the joys of travelling in and out of Cambridge yet, so I wouldn't weight their thoughts on this as highly. But I do think if we put our minds to it, there are methods of reaching the student population whilst they're not actually in situ. How many respond will be very much up to them. So very much comments. So the only wrapping it all up, apart from my thoughts on the subject, was I recommendations A and B, but I didn't go for the recommendation was automatically to have the cycle students. Sorry.
Thank you.
Yeah, I agree. The first thing is we've got to get on and prioritise. There's no point in wasting time and money on schemes. And not only wasting the money, I am very conscious that 2019 is not far away when you start on all these schemes and trying to get something done. And we don't get the next lot of money unless we show that we've done something and made a difference in the first. And to me, that's one of the problems. The other thing is that I agree with you over the consultation. Yes, I understand the problem of somebody will always say I was away on holiday, but we can't really afford to wait and not launch the consultation until, say, September to November, because we've lost another 3 or 4 months. We are so time critical on this since we've got this coming in examination in 2019, and it does cause me some concerns. And then finally, yes, I think the answer is we have got to get on and get it done, because the 3 things we're going to be judged on are what the schemes were, have we delivered, and have we delivered them on time and budget. So I think, yeah, we've got to get on and get doing it. So I don't know what you're doing this weekend, Graham, but if you can make a start.
Any other comments? So I don't think we're planning to amend the recommendations that are in front of us. We take the point that the Assembly has reiterated that it favours us looking at the rural cycling scheme should there be resources, and we will come back to that. The two recommendations effectively give a resource towards the post-2020 programme, and then I'm expecting Mr. Hughes got a report in the autumn. Okay. And I don't think we need to change the recommendations, but I think it's been minuted that we obviously do want to ensure that the engagement does include those that are away. I'd like to think, Councillor Camp, that we can contact the students in the summer, but they seem to be, it isn't just that they're physically away from Cambridge, they're also mentally away from Cambridge, I think. But we can engage with them. I don't think it's the end of the discussion. We cannot solve the problems of Cambridge with extra tarmac and extra reorientation of the roads alone. So we're going to need, as you say, to have positive incentives for people, working with the major employers, working with the schools, and the range of initiatives that are outlined here, where we're looking at range of both options of both sticks and carrots to be part of addressing the congestion issues, particularly at the peak time. So I put, without any amendments, the two recommendations in item 8 on page 35. So that's items A and B. Are we taking those on block, Happy? Okay. So, yeah. So if we, I do agree. So if we agree those, yeah. Okay. So thank you. So that's that, and then we have the only other further item we've got on the agenda is the sort of forward work programme, and I think we've also somewhere else got a set of planned dates that will publish those. So the work programme is listed on page 49. Any issues or comments on that? No? Okay, well thank you for everybody for thank you for all the inputs that we've had, including yours, Councillor Bick, and we will be meeting again in June. So we look forward to some further progress then. Thank you for all the work that's been put in by the officers and that have brought us to today. It's been a lot of work. We're getting on the road.